The International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Welcome to NDE Radio, brought to you by IANDS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. I'm your host, Lee Witting. Our guest today, Tricia McCannon, is a near-death experiencer, as well as a gifted clairvoyant, historian, author, and teacher who has dedicated her life to discovering and teaching the parallel wisdoms in a wide variety of spiritual traditions from east to west. As a mystical symbologist, she writes and speaks on a variety of subjects, from the quest for the Philosopher's Stone to the lost years of Jesus, the ancient civilization of Atlantis, to angels and extraterrestrials. Tricia is the author of 13 online books, 5 published books, and over 30 DVDs, including Dialogues with the Angels, Return of the Divine Sophia, Jesus, the Explosive Story of the 30 Lost Years and the Ancient Mystery Religions, and her latest book, The Angelic Origins of the Soul. She's the director of the Phoenix Fire Lodge Mystery School in Atlanta, Georgia, and is an initiate of many ancient streams of knowledge, including mystical Christianity, Celtic, Egyptian, and Native American wisdoms, the teachings of the Viraji Masters, and the rebirth of the feminine divine in our world today. As a world-renowned clairvoyant, hypnotherapist, and healer, she has given soul readings for over 6,000 people around the world in her commitment to world healing. And she can be reached through her website at Tricia McCannonspeaks.com. TriciaMcCannonspeaks.com. Tricia, welcome to NDE Radio.
Lee, thank you so much for having me on, and Merry Christmas to all of our listeners.
Oh, yes, that's coming up faster than I could hope.
It always does in December. And, you know, here in Atlanta, where I'm from, we got hit with a snowstorm this weekend, so I still have half my yard covered in snow, but it is melting.
Yes, well, what didn't fall there came up to Maine and fell in our yard, so we're dealing with 6 inches as well.
Oh, my gosh. Well, Maine is such a beautiful state, you know, and I figured you guys get a heck of a lot more snow than we do down here in the South.
For sure. First of all, let me say your new book is fascinating in the way it draws parallels to the various mystery traditions from around the world. And also, I love Gustave Doré, and those engravings that you've used in the book are just so beautiful. That he really has an understanding of the circles and spirals, doesn't he?
He does. And, you know, for me, I am a clairvoyant, so I'm a seer, and I was an art major. I painted. I was a commercial photographer for many, many years, probably 25 years here in Atlanta, where I shot for Macy's and Calvin Klein and many people like that. So, and of course, as a student of the great spiritual mysteries and also a teacher, they use these hermetic symbols to convey very holographic bodies of knowledge. And so, of course, if you weren't an initiate, you know, you just looked at different things and said, oh, there's an owl or there's a cross or whatever. But if you were an initiate, you understood the deeper meanings behind the symbols. And so in all of my books, I try to, I probably have about 100 black and white illustrations because, of course, I'm teaching this ancient wisdom stream that we've mostly lost in our society today. And I was really excited with this new book because my wonderful publisher, Inner Traditions, gave me permission to do a color folio. So we have 16 gorgeous color pages as well as all of the beautiful black and white.
Yeah, that's a great addition to the book as well. I wanted to start by asking you, your gifts and visions first appeared long before you had your near-death experience, when you were a little girl, and I was hoping you could tell us about what you first saw and heard. I mean, when your gifts first, when you first became aware of these gifts.
Well, I think a lot of children actually have these gifts. I actually believe all human beings have clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, and claircognitive ability. And, of course, that comes from the French word clair, clear, and voyant, seeing, hearing, feeling, knowing, so forth. I I think many of us are tuned to those inner spiritual worlds, particularly in the first 6 or 7 years of our life. And then, we go to school and we get programmed and we start a new existence here. And there are many, many stories of people being able to, let us say, see past lives when they're little, or remember memories from their soul records, or being able to speak in foreign languages, something called xenoglossy. Dr. Ian Stevenson talks about it. But for me, I grew up across some great forests, and I think nature is one of the most powerful and beautiful teachers that we have. I spent a lot of time after school and growing up in this forest. And, when you really sink into that stillness within yourself, you can really connect with the divine, with God. And I began to see in the forest these beautiful little kind of translucent elemental energies that are like the guardian angels of the nature kingdom. And I think because most human beings can't see them, they were surprised that I could see them. So they obviously went and told the overlighting angel that overlit that vast forest that to come and talk with me. And so when I was about 8 years old, this angel came. He was, he looked humanoid to me. He had a wavy hair down to his shoulders. And he began to teach me about the vast chain of being and how the light and sound of God are stepped down through the various dimensions to eventually coalesce into what we think of as the physical or material world. And, it was a very powerful experience for me because I could tell that on one hand he seemed far more connected to spirit, like pure. I mean, he didn't have an ego self, although he certainly was an individual. But he was totally in pure service to the divine, but he did not have the complexity of subtle energy bodies that, we humans have. He didn't have the ego or the mental body or the emotional astral bodies or the physical body, but he clearly, had feeling, he had compassion, and he had perception, which was, the activation of the soul body more than the mental body. So, I was always pondering, clearly, there's a difference between us, and at least in terms of our complicated layering once we become human.
Right. Now, you were raised a traditional Christian. Did you tell your family about this vision that you had?
I began to write poetry from these experiences from the time I was 8, and it was like I could hear the poems in my head. I guess that's clairaudience, and I began to write voluminous amounts of really just poetry about the divine, really. And my mom, wanted to know where I was going after school. She was a very protective mom, and I was going to the forest, but then there was this also magical little garden glade behind this old woman's house where she had obviously lovingly tended the flowers for years, and these little nature spirits were singing there. And I used to go there sometimes and sit in her garden and watch the spirits. And my mom, of course, being a proper Southern woman, wanted to be sure I wasn't trespassing. So she took me, when she made me tell her, she took me over there and knocked on the woman's door, and we went in, and my mother had a cup of tea with the woman and asked for permission for her child to come. But, of course, they did not know that I was seeing these, let us say, angelic beings. And it just broke the spell for me, so I never went back to that garden again. At least I had the forest. So that was good.
So many years later, you had a near-death experience. Tell us what that was about and what you saw.
Well, there are millions of people around the world that have had NDEs, and I'm only one of them. But I in my second section of this new book, The Landscapes of Heaven, is that the name of that section. I really talk about those landscapes, and I think because I am a clairvoyant, I've had the ability to pull the curtain back my whole life, more with control as I got older. But I certainly did not expect to have a near-death experience. And I remember reading about Daniel Brinkley's, who's a friend of mine, a few years earlier and thinking, oh, wouldn't it be cool to have a near-death experience? The actuality of the logistics, I was in the hospital for a month. It was a $40,000 bill. Oh, my gosh, the third-dimensional world. But the experience itself was so profound. It was really life-changing. I found myself in this like round domed chamber, very ethereal with light, and there were these 5 human-looking humanoid beings that were, you couldn't see any features. They were just radiant white and gold light. And they completely flooded me with unconditional love. And they were arrayed kind of in a semicircle, and they seemed to kind of be above me, you know, kind of like I never saw a dais or anything, but if you can imagine, like a panel of, you know, the Lords of Karma. And, you know, there was no judgment at all. There was unconditional love. And they said, we really see you and we honor you for all the thousands of people that you have helped. And, of course, you know, I'm a hypnotherapist, I'm a healer, I'm a clairvoyant, an astrologer, I'm many things. And, of course, I go out and speak and teach to people. So that was a really profoundly healing experience for me because in my family of origin, and I have, you know, 2 sisters and a wonderful mother, and they're all, I think, devoted to God in their own way, but much more within the very, very traditional, at least some of them, narrow Christian confines. So, you know, I had never really felt accepted in or seen or, let us say, appreciated in this way by my family. So it was very healing for me. And I said to them, you know, I'm really tired. I'd really like to come home now. And they said, well, you know, how about all those thousands of souls that you said that you would help, that if you come home now, you won't be able to help? And I saw then many things. I saw that we each come into this world with a contract, and that if we renege on that contract, if we commit suicide or we throw in the towel early or we don't, you know, allow ourselves to overcome the many challenges that we all face coming into this lifetime, afterwards we'll feel very, very disappointed with ourselves, like somehow, you know, we just did not, you know, muster up the energy or the courage or the determination to do what we knew we could do before we came in. And I also saw that in heaven, the gold, G-O-L-D, the real gold of heaven is the purity of your heart. It's who you help and who helps you. It's who you love and who loves you. What good did your passing through this world do? And that is what really, really matters. What did you learn? And how did you help others along the way? And of course, a lot of our listeners, I think, probably are people who are very dedicated to helping others. And it could be as a teacher or a fireman or a policeman or a housewife or a writer or a doctor or a nurse. I mean, there's so many different ways, even just helping someone across the street or helping them with their groceries. There are many, many ways in which we can serve, but at the end of the day, that is the measure of a life. It's not how much money we make, and it's not how big our car is or our bank account.
Right. The complexity, one of the great features of your book is the complexity of all the various religions. You seem to find parallels and that all religions, the mystery side of all religions, tell the same story, although in different language. And there's a lot of detail, so much detail that I haven't finished the book yet, and I'm hoping you'll come back and we'll talk about the second half of the book. But for instance, in the landscapes of heaven area, you talk about the various levels of heaven, the astral and so forth. And St. Paul talked about having a near-death experience and going to the third heaven. Perhaps you could elaborate a little bit on those various levels, the landscapes of heaven portion of your book.
Well, first I want to say about your first part of your comment is that within the world religions, there was always an exoteric or an outer path that taught morality, and then there was a deeper path, an esoteric path, that really taught the true keys to being able to access the inner realms. And so at the exoteric level, we have a lot of ritual and dogma and things like that, and people who are maybe well-intentioned, but they really are not enlightened. And so consequently, they do their very best within the rigid confines of the various religions. So on the surface, they might appear to not agree. But if you go into the deeper inner teachings, the esoteric teachings, all of the masters and all of the sages basically agree with one another. And that's what I seek to teach in all of my books and all of my work, is to show how the inner esoteric wisdom unites us instead of divides us.
Mm.
And so and to respond to the second part of your comment or question, yeah, the ancient teachings tell us that there are basically 7-dimensional planes in the lower realms. The lower realms are realms that are bound to the grid of space-time. And in our dimension, we have 48 laws of physics that must be obeyed, unless you, let's say, are a real master and you have learned how to transcend those. And, of course, if you have, you might be able to levitate or, do like the Filipino healers, where you put your hand through people's bodies to repair them, or, use your telepathy or walk through walls, or some of the many things we hear sages from the East have been able to do. The plane above this one, the astral plane, has 24 laws. So some of the things we think of as magic down here are business as usual up there because they're not as constricted. The fifth dimensional world, some call it the Atma plane or the mental plane. That plane has only 12 laws that must be obeyed. The sixth dimensional plane has only 6, and the seventh dimensional plane has only 3 laws. So obviously there's more freedom. We can fly, for example, in the fourth dimension. Telepathy is normal. We can be downloaded with ideas that would take us hours to talk about with words, but we can literally receive it in a minute or two, in an instant. And, of course, angels actually, although they may be stationed in the third and fourth and fifth dimension, they're basically beings that are anchored in the sixth and seventh dimension. So this is how they're able to appear, disappear, manifest, become solid, become, ethereal, communicate information telepathically, and so forth. And when we, think about some of the great masters that have been on this plane, they have graduated, of course. Many of them didn't even have to come down here. They already were highly enlightened beings, but they volunteered to come down to deliver a message to uplift humanity. People like Jesus, what an incredible soul he is. And this is one of the reasons, of course, I've written about him in a lot of my books, is because I really love him. But these masters, many of them are stationed in the fifth dimension or the fourth. Usually once a teacher goes on into the sixth or seventh dimension, they're really not so concerned with the affairs of the third dimensional realm. But there are many great masters and avatars that are in the fourth and fifth dimension that are, let us say, overseeing temples of golden wisdom, or acting as lords of karma, or as lipkas, or the great chohans, for example, of the 7 rays of healing and so forth. There are many jobs to do, and all of them are really focused on trying to raise the consciousness of the souls that are down here in the third dimension, whether it's on this planet or another planet.
When some people have had profound near-death experiences, they come back saying, for one thing, that while they were there, they felt they had the answer to every question they ever wondered about, and 2, that the answer to everything is love and God's love. So why are there so many different levels, and why, even when you're on one level, you're still studying to reach the next level? Why is that knowledge not available immediately?
Well, I think that all of us come from the higher worlds, and this is what I've seen in the 6,000 plus soul readings that I've done for people around the world. 30 years ago, I was only going back 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years in people's history. Then I made a leap to where I was going back 20, 30, 40, 50,000 years, and I found myself in earlier ages, let's say, of the planet Earth, the time of Atlantis or Lemuria. And then, I'd start asking where was the soul before that. And eventually, by pulling the vibrational thread, the unique vibration of every single soul, because every soul is unique, I began to travel and follow the souls up into the fourth and then the fifth and the sixth and the seventh dimension. Eventually, I came to what I would call the Genesis Matrix. And what I discovered is that basically, God is, let us say, the infinite creative intelligence of all things. We're swimming in the body of God, so to speak. But each of us has the spark of God within us. the spirit of life is given to us from that spark of God. And we do take a journey, as you'll discover in the third section when you get into that. We take a journey from, let us say, the plenum or the ocean of love and mercy, which is what the masters call it, where we come down into the seventh and the sixth and the fifth and the fourth and eventually the third. And in every dimension, in order to participate in that dimension, we have to take on a body. So, just like here in the third dimension, if you didn't have a third-dimensional body, you might be a ghost, but nobody could see you, and you sure couldn't go out to dinner with your friends, or at least they wouldn't be talking to you if you did. So, in the seventh dimension, we take on a soul body. In the sixth dimension, we take on a spiritual, etheric, or Buddhic body. It's also called a rainbow body. And in those levels, we're able to hear the music of the spheres all the time. We know where to go, what to do, how to serve, and we don't have an ego, but we are building experience and individuation and our co-creative skills. God, of course, is the ultimate creator, so we have that creative spark within us, and of course the whole idea is we learn to become positive co-creators instead of creating chaos, mayhem, and war, and so we're all still working on that lesson as a planet. And then eventually we come into the fifth dimension where we get a causal body which records everything that happens. That body remains consistent through all of our lifetimes in the third and fourth. And it's also called by the masters the store of good. It's where all of our soul records are kept, the library of all of our experiences. And once we become enlightened, that store of good is released to us. And this is why you have, as people become more and more enlightened, you have people who are masterful. They can sing, they can act, they can dance, they can paint, they can write. They can do all these incredible things because through the centuries they've developed these gifts and abilities. We also have the mental body, which is a beautiful, refined body, but definitely more limited than the soul body. It can only do about 3 or 4 things at once. And then we get the ego. And then that becomes a very complex conversation about the mechanism of the ego and why it's important, but also why embedded within it are what are called the 3 lies of Adi, or first karma. In other words, these are not illusionary beliefs that we developed ourselves to begin with. They give us one of these in order to allow us to experience free will. And with the, let us say, receiving of that ego, with that first belief that we're separate from God, we realize that we have a choice. We have lots of choices. And so with that, we descend into the third and fourth dimension. And it really has to do with, let us say, God. We can sort of look at it like a cosmic game of hide and seek, where the lover is seeking the beloved, and the beloved is seeking the lover. In other words, just like we want to love and be loved, we want to know and be known, so does God. Not through someone forcing someone to marry you or love you, but through the free will and having our hearts and minds and spirits turn towards the beloved. And, of course, the beloved is ever with us, ever patient, watching our slow or fast progress, our mistakes, and loving us through all of them. But in the end of the day, it must be our own choice to come back to choosing to align with the light of all lights.
You've written that the eternal part of us remains in heaven while we are down here in physical reality. How does that work?
Well, that was one of my big takeaways. Whenever I write these books, there's a team of spiritual masters and beings that are in my house for the year or the 3 years or whatever it is it takes for me to give birth to one of these books. And, I think I, know where I'm going with the book, but in the writing of it, there's no chemical process. And for me, in this particular book, it was one of the big takeaways really had to do with the discovery of the angelic twin. And the angelic twin is a concept we find in the Essenes, in the Gnostics, and also in the Tibetan teachings, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, again, the esoteric teachings. And that is basically this radiant angelic being that we actually are, even though we have amnesia and we've completely forgotten. This radiant being in its, let us say, causal self and above remains in the higher worlds, and that it chooses for experience to extend a portion of itself, maybe 20, 30, 40% of itself into the third dimension in order to gain experience. And many times it chooses to take on challenges that once we get here in the physical, we're like, what the hell? You know, I don't know. Why am I born in this family? You know?
Yes.
On the doorstep, you know, why don't we have some money? How come I'm not as pretty as I thought I should be? You know, how come I'm, you know, how about those rich kids? How did they get that lottery number? And I got this one. But at that higher level, we are able to see what we need to learn. You know, as they say, if you want courage, you're given challenges to overcome. You want forgiveness, you got to be given people to forgive. So at that higher level, we can see very clearly at the soul level what we need. And even though it might feel like a bitter pill down here, at that higher level, we know that 50, 80, 100 years down here, if we can put in the time, that it will strengthen us and deepen us at a level that an easy life never would. So we choose these challenges with our team, with our guides, with the Lords of Karma, who are able to reveal to us, along with our own angelic twin, who, of course, is who we truly are in the enlightened state. So part of what the sacred marriages that Jesus talks about, and I speak about this in each one of my books at a different level. You know, in one book I talk about it as the marriage of the masculine and feminine, the left and the right hemispheres of the brain that opens the third eye and allows us to pull back the veils. I talk about it that way in Return of the Divine Sophia. In this book, I talk about it as the marriage of the mortal self and the higher self, the angelic twin. And this is, again, a sacred ceremony that, believe it or not, was being done in the Catholic Church. You know, we hear very little about it because, of course, unfortunately, some of these institutions that started off with the best aims and the best intentions kind of have lost their way through politics and power and greed and all that stuff through the years. And so, you know, seeing a return to some of these inner teachings is great. I just wish they would release them more for the masses to be able to do this, not just some of the clergy.
Yes, absolutely. I wish all religions would acknowledge and honor the experiences, the personal mystical experiences that almost everyone encounters from, you know, at some point in their lives. We are just about out of time, and I want to give you time to tell people how they can get your books and find out more about your mystery school.
Very easy. You know, you can go to my website, Tricia, Tricia, just like, you know, Patricia with no P-A, Tricia McCannon, just like it sounds, McCannon, Speaks, SPEAKS.com. And you'll find I've got about 30 DVDs there, about 10 CDs. These are all really professionally done, and many of them are about the great spiritual mysteries, the Tree of Life, you know, the cycles of time and so forth. I also have, for the last 12 years, I've been teaching a mystery school here in Atlanta that, of course, combines beautiful esoteric Christianity with a lot of the great spiritual mysteries from Egypt, the Druids, the Native Americans, the Tibetans, all of that, because at the end of the day, they do resolve and agree with one another. So I finally, about 3 years ago, got 12 online classes up online. So you can just, you know, go to the little tab that says Mysteries. There's a drop-down, and you can take a look. Every single one of those classes that are about 100 to 180 pages each with problems and exercises. They can just, you know, start at the beginning and study one at a time, or if you order the first three or the second or third three together, you know, it saves you about $75, so that's great. And my book's online, or you can even go to Amazon if you want to, or go to your local bookstore and ask.
Tricia, we have barely scratched the surface. If you'll come back again soon, we'll pick up where we left off.
I really look forward to it, Lee.
In the meantime, I want to thank our guest, Tricia McCannon, for sharing the story of her amazing, productive spiritual research with us today. And if you'd like to listen to this show again or any of our past shows, just go to our website at nderadio.org. For information on IANDS, check out their website at IANDS.org. And join us again next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern, for more NDE Radio. This is Lee Witting saying thanks for listening.